Well, we saw last week, and he went down, he got up, and
Originally, we had a very fun video for you guys today featuring Tyreek Hill facing off against Eli Apple, the revenge game for Tyreek Hill. We had a bunch of cool interview clips. You had Tua coming in and saying, every time Tyreek Hill is going to be facing off against Eli Apple, I'm just going to chuck it up to him. Look.
You know, if Tyreek is matched up with him and we call a play for Tyreek and it's one-on-one, I'm giving Tyreek a shot. Just know that he is getting the ball.
It was going to be so much fun, but as a result of what occurred tonight, we had to make you guys a separate video because this is a very serious issue. Without further ado, break! Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Man, I love seeing rivalry games on primetime television. You told me that I was going to get excited about the Miami Dolphins versus the Cincinnati Bengals on Thursday Night Football 3 years ago. I would have laughed in your face and maybe threw up a little bit. On the Cincinnati Bengals end of things have not gone according to plan for them this year. After an offseason where they invested heavily in their offensive line, one would imagine that you would see a step forward for Joe Burrow. And ultimately, that wasn't what ended up happening. The Cincinnati Bengals have experienced some sort of offensive miscue in each and every week so far this season. Now, there's reasoning behind each and every offensive miscue. I mean, in week 1 against the Pittsburgh Steelers, yeah, Joe Burrow threw 4 interceptions and got sacked 7 times. In week 2, yeah, I know it's ridiculous losing to a backup QB in Cooper Rush, who's undefeated for my Cowboys so far. And it looks like Trevon Diggs was on when he faced off against Jamar Chase as opposed to being off.
He's not too much on technique sound though, you know what I'm saying? He's a little hit or miss, you know what I'm saying? Like he's either all the way on, he's like not on at all. So, but he's definitely a great athlete.
In week 3, it seems like Jamar Chase got locked down by Sauce Gardner, which congrats to the Jets. It looks like you guys really hit on that pick. So this game was a very big game for the Cincinnati Bengals, outside of the beef that is probably the most exciting part of the game for me. On the Miami Dolphins end of things, they started out the season remarkably. I mean, the Mike McDaniel hire and the Tyreek Hill acquisition was fantastic, despite everyone talking mess about Tua Tagovailoa's arm and his ability to get the football to Tyreek Hill despite not having a Patrick Mahomes-like arm. The Dolphins were 3-0. But at the same time, coming into this game, there was no shortage of drama because it seems like Mike McDaniel had a huge miscue as a result of having to practice in Ohio a little bit earlier. So unauthorized Dolphins practice footage got leaked online ahead of the Thursday night showdown with the Cincinnati Bengals. And you know what's really funny about this? I actually covered Spygate on this channel, and the team that was involved at the time was the Cincinnati Bengals, although they were the victim at the time. Still pretty ironic, I guess. It seems like there's a bunch of students and a bunch of fans watching the Miami Dolphins practice, and footage got leaked onto social media as a result of it. The Dolphins even sent out a letter to Barstool asking them to take down the footage of the closed practice, but you guys know how the internet works, man. Once it's out there, it's out there. So here's the crazy part. Mike McDaniel apparently actually noticed that the students were watching, and he decided to put 12 offensive players on the field for each practice play so that anyone who saw the footage wouldn't get a full idea of what the Dolphins were doing. You can look at this in one of 2 ways. Either it was a brilliant tactic, or the Miami Dolphins actually wasted a whole walkthrough trying to fool a bunch of students that were taking videos of them. So there's drama from both sides coming into this game. So here's another storyline that we need to discuss, and probably the biggest storyline of this game. Practices aside, we have to talk about the fact that last week against the Buffalo Bills, in a heroic victory against the Buffalo Bills, might I add, right before halftime, Tua was bum rushed by Matt Milano and ended up taking a pretty hard shot to the head. You see his head slammed against the field. As he was jogging back into the huddle, he took a bit of a stumble. Now, look, at that time, you can make a lot of excuses for why Tua stumbled. I mean, for one, he was playing in extreme heat. Maybe he's dehydrated, maybe he's dizzy, but that's still pretty opportune timing for him to take a shot to the head and then stumbling on his way back to the huddle. Another reason could be what we're all thinking, and probably the most likely scenario. Hey, maybe he suffered a concussion, and maybe he should not be allowed to play in the game. Because we've seen in the past what's happened to players that have sustained head injuries in the NFL and didn't allow those head injuries to properly heal. It seemed like that was just a blip on the radar for the Miami Dolphins, because Tua just came jogging back in later on in the game and heroically won the game for the Miami Dolphins. Let's say he did suffer a concussion. He should not be playing in that game again, but let's say you get away with it, right? Let's say you were able to finally get him back into the game, get him to win the game. He didn't suffer any major hits, and you're ready to move on. If the Dolphins knew that he suffered a concussion, which is a crazy accusation that I'm going to let you guys make, but this is just a hypothetical. If the Dolphins knew that he suffered a concussion, then wouldn't it be reasonable not to have him play 4 days later on Thursday Night Football? But here's the thing, that's not what the Dolphins did. The NFL claimed that the Dolphins followed proper concussion protocol when assessing Tua. Now bear in mind, this is where it gets scary. The league is still working through this investigation, which was requested by the NFL Players Association following Miami's win over Buffalo. But Miller said that the early indications are that proper protocol was followed. The process usually takes a week or two to make sure that we spent enough time with all the people who were involved in the protocol and the evaluation to get a sense as to whether it was followed. Every indication from our perspective is that it was. I know that the player, the coach, and others have spoken to this. Now, a formal answer is apparently supposed to come in the next week or two, and the Miami Dolphins kind of wrote this off as a back injury. They claimed that Tua suffered a back injury that he suffered on a sneak play earlier in the game that was re-aggravated on the Milano hit. According to Tua, on the quarterback sneak, his legs got caught under someone and they were trying to push back. It felt like I hyperextended my back. On the next play, I hit my back and kind of hurt it. Then I got up and that's kind of like when I stumbled. For the most part, I'm good, past whatever concussion protocol they had. Now, regardless, the Miami Dolphins decided to allow this man to play 4 days later. So it seems like either they knew that he had a concussion, but it wasn't that bad and maybe he's recovered, which that's not how concussions work, or they actually deluded themselves into thinking that despite Tua slamming his head in the game against the Buffalo Bills, he was good to go 4 days later, despite having Teddy Bridgewater, which is clearly a capable backup QB. So look at this. A neuroscientist by the name of Chris Nowinski said if Tua takes the field tonight, it's a massive step back for concussion care in the NFL. If he has a second concussion that destroys his season or career, everyone involved will be sued and should lose their jobs. Coaches included, we all saw it. Even they must know that this isn't right. So someone challenged him. Dr. Nowinski, do you have any take/thought on the reported story that it's his back and leg and not his head that were injured during the game? Nowinski says, in addition to stumbling when he stood up and fell, he never reached for his back or leg. Instead, he reached for his head and then shook his head side to side to quote unquote clear the cobwebs. The NFL and the Dolphins take us for fools. And oh my God, there is a storm brewing, and it's a well-deserved storm. Because the one thing that the NFL's been trying to hide is the effects of CTE. They paint a lot of the stars of yesterday's game, or even recently, players like Antonio Brown and Earl Thomas, which I know maybe it's disrespectful for throwing out that they have CTE, but we have a whole documentary on Antonio Brown prior to the Vontaze Burfict hit, and the way he was interviewing, and after the Vontaze Burfict hit, and the way he was interviewing. The worst possible scenario happened tonight when we saw Tua get slammed, literally slammed during a sack on Thursday Night Football. I have never seen a hit this gruesome. I have never seen a neurological response that literally causes someone to pretty much throw up gang signs, for lack of a better way of saying it, as a result of being hit this hard 4 days after what occurred on Sunday. Now, as a result of this, what could end up happening to Tua? Well, here's what the doctor says. I take no pleasure in being right. Pray for Tua. We saw this coming. Get angry. Get involved with @ConcussionLF to make sure the NFL can't do this again. You guys should go to jail for letting him play 5 days after an obvious concussion that you covered up. If he dies from second impact syndrome, I'm pushing for murder charges. So currently, Tua has been taken to a local hospital for further evaluation. He is conscious and has movement in all of his extremities. But man, what is the long-term damage going to be as a result of this? I mean, you hear happier stories like Troy Aikman, who suffered way too many concussions and as a result had to retire from football early. And he seems to be doing okay. I mean, he's a freaking commentator and his brain seems to be intact from the most part from what I see. But what about the players that don't make it out as well? What about players like Junior Seau or Aaron Hernandez, or players that are alive currently, the aforementioned Antonio Brown and Earl Thomas? Or what about lesser known players like Marion Barber III, who most people probably don't know who it is unless if you're like a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan. My goal isn't to absolutely eviscerate the NFL, but I do think a bigger emphasis needs to be placed on protecting their players from these types of injuries. Because at the end of the day, I am, and I think most of us are, very sensitive to players who are having their careers mismanaged. I mean, we made a video on Justin Herbert being left in during garbage time despite having fractured rib cartilage. We have a huge 40-minute documentary. I invested thousands of dollars into this. It's probably going to get copyright claimed on the tragedy of the mismanagement of Andrew Luck's career, one of the greatest talents and prospects that we've ever seen in NFL history. So my goal isn't to eviscerate the NFL. Hell, I don't have the power to do that. I just think that it's important that we protect its players. So the latest update we have on Tua is the fact that the NFLPA tweeted out that player health and safety is at the core of the union's mission. Our concern tonight is for Tua, and we hope for a full and speedy recovery. Our investigation into the potential protocol violation is ongoing, like we mentioned earlier on in this video. But we actually got additional news at the end of Thursday Night Football. And I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to criticize this. I'm just hoping they do right by him, and this is just good news in general. Tua Tagovailoa will be released from the hospital and will travel home with the Dolphins, the team tells Kaylee Hartung. Very good news there, obviously, though answers still needed in how this week was handled, which we're going to be covering extensively on this channel. Make sure you drop a like, subscribe, turn on our notifications, and follow us on our other social media platforms if you want to help the channel grow. And if you want to go the extra mile in supporting the channel, we have a Patreon and channel memberships program. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.